From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
And good morning and welcome to the program. Today it was a very historic week around the world as the longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II, died on Thursday at the age of 96. Now King Charles III takes the throne. What does the Queen's passing mean for the rest of the world and certainly the British people? Here to talk about the future of the monarchy is BYU British Literature professor and former head of the European Studies, Nicholas Mason. Professor, welcome to the program. And what was your first blush to the images we saw and the words we heard from now the new King of England?
Well, just the instant reaction is just how odd it sounds to be thinking about the King of England, to be thinking about this moment when we'll be going from God Save the Queen, which has been the case for pretty much all of our lives, to God Save the King. And then just needing to take this figure of Charles, whom we've viewed in so many different ways for so long, and recast him in the kind of the mold of a king and the gravitas that's associated with that. He certainly has been in training for it his entire life, and he's learned from a true master of the art in his mother, and so he seems off on the right foot, at least.
Before we talk about what is to be expected regarding the funeral and the coronation, since we are so familiar with Charles as the Prince of Wales, now as Charles III, the King of the UK, what type of image does he have? There has not been a life without controversy, and there is controversy now within the British family, the royal family. What is he inheriting with his own reputation? We know the shadow that he is in, but in what condition is his image?
Not especially high, but by the same token, not as low as it may have been 15 or 20 years ago, surrounding Diana's death and the aftermath from that. Part of the challenge he has is that there's not a great deal of natural warmth to him in ways that we see, especially with his son Harry, and to some extent with William. Charles comes off as more austere. His cause has not been helped obviously by the sort of PR battles with Diana, which she tended to win. But he also has a bit of a history of kind of throwing pointy elbows on particular hobby horses of his, whether they be architectural or cultural or otherwise. And so it's, you know, I haven't looked at recent public opinion polls, but I think it's safe to say that if the Queen enjoyed 80 or 90% approval ratings in Britain, his would probably be half of that.
He mentioned in the speech that he made on Friday that he was going to miss, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but some of his passionate interests and the various charities and causes that he has worked very, very hard for. You alluded to that. In some cases, he's had some sharpened elbows, and he said that he was going to have to step away from that because he had other responsibilities. When it comes to what he said in the actual speech, what was your first blush reaction to it? Was it kind of where it needed to be for the people of the UK?
I think so. It seems that he obviously has a team around him, and he probably was listening to some good PR people, and he may also have learned, again, from a lifetime of preparing for this role of what works and doesn't work. I think I will assume that many people were particularly taken with his singling out Harry and Meghan, which seemed heartfelt and was obviously a nice gesture, but to go back to his public persona, many people, including myself, seem to think that when Meghan and Harry in their Oprah interview were alluding to racial bigotry in the palace. It seemed to be that was directed towards Charles, and so there's a lot of work to be done there.
It seems like many people who have served in high public office have relatives that they sometimes have to cope with, and he certainly has his, and he certainly has his own baggage to carry. What about the stability of the monarch itself? Even under Queen Elizabeth II, there were some rocks thrown at the monarchy. How stable is it?
I think it isn't going away anytime soon, but it certainly is foreseeable that there could be a crisis either of their making or not of their making that could imperil it. It is an anachronism. It's difficult to justify in many ways, but by the same token, it's quite easy to argue economically that it's a big boost for the British. It's the face of their nation, it's their brand. And also just we see in the news coverage since Queen Elizabeth's death that it is a genuine unifier in the country. I've thought for many years here in the United States how difficult it would be to select a fifth person for Mount Rushmore. Some people would want Obama, other people would want Reagan, and everyone would fight over it. Whereas the nonpartisan nature of the modern monarchy is such that it really can be this unifying force if handled properly. And that's what Elizabeth was such a master of.
Professor, we have just a second, but if tradition holds here, how quickly will we have a coronation? The King alluded to the fact it'll be about a week until the Queen's funeral. By the time this airs, that may be firmed down. But what about the coronation of Charles III?
It's difficult to say as far as timing, because 70 years have passed. I mean, one of the great revolutionary things about Elizabeth's coronation is that it was the first that was televised. Well, think about all that's changed even in those 70 years, and the media spectacle that it will be. It used to be historically that oftentimes a couple of months would pass between the death of one monarch and the coronation, simply so the right people could show up in town. That's obviously less of an obstacle, but I'm sure out of respect and deference to his mother, he likely would want some period of time to pass in the name of decorum.
Professor, thank you for letting us tap into your expertise. We appreciate you being a guest today on Sunday Edition, and we'll be right back with a look at the latest political landscape here in the state of Utah. And of course, our U.S. Senate race here in the state is making headlines not only here, but nationwide. We'll talk about that with Kirk Jowers coming up next. Welcome back to the program, and races around the state are heating up as we are now just 2 months from this year's midterm election. One race, of course, that is catching headlines in Utah and around the nation. It's the Senate race with independent Evan McMullin challenging GOP Senator Mike Lee. Joining me right now to talk about the political landscape here in our great state is Kirk Jowers, and you have a new title, and I'm going to get it right here. It's the CEO of ADDA.
That's right, Addicts Overland. I think it's going to be amazing. We'll do a press release and hopefully people like it. But
so is this breaking news that we're doing right here?
It is actually breaking news. We haven't put a press release out yet, so we're pretty new. So you're very kind to do that. But I'm here to talk politics.
Exactly. We've known each other a long time, and your time at the Hinckley Institute was just wonderful, golden for us. And I thought when we were talking about the overall landscape, not even a particular race, although we'll get into that, but just kind of a gut feeling on this year's midterm, I thought we got to talk to Kirk Jowers. As you look around the country and here in the state of Utah, what is the vibe? What is different this year? And of course, if you want to guess how things are going to go, knock yourself out.
Yeah. It's a really interesting year. Back in April and May, Republicans were supremely confident, expecting a 40-50 House pickup, get enough of a Senate lead that, well, one, take back over the Senate, but also have, 2 or 3 comfort level. and that was because Joe Biden was at historically low levels. With the exception of George W. Bush's first midterm election, every president, even the more popular ones like Obama, Clinton, lost massively in that first midterm.
Right.
So everything looked like a Republican sweep. Since that time, we've had the January 6th hearings, we've had the abortion ruling, we've had a few other things which have made it more difficult. And so we are seeing all of those polls that were showing a 30, 40, 50, 60 seat pickup get closer to 10, 20 seat pickup. Most people predict the Republicans will take control of the House, but it'll be very narrow. And the Senate is becoming more and more in doubt. And as Mitch McConnell said, to Senator Scott's great consternation, a lot of that is also because we made some missed choices on our nominees. We picked less electable people, more in the Trump mode than in the mode that could be elected. And so the whole Trump thing just really messes up predictions.
And boy, it seems to never go away, does it? It is always that factor, either in the foreground or in the background. It is there. I'm reading articles and hearing stories about those deep Republican wells of funding. Aren't as deep as people thought.
No, Democrats seem to be out fundraising Republicans mostly across the board, with a few big exceptions, and certainly at the national levels that can kind of dump money when and where they want to. Infamously, McConnell told a real wealthy guy, I think it was in the Ohio race, you paid for him, keep paying for him. And I think it was Peter Thiel, the PayPal founder, and he said, you got to pay for this, and we don't have the money to pay for it. And
interesting.
It is really interesting. So all of those rosy unicorn and rainbow hopes for Republicans are now in question, and that's going to be the question. Does this slide continue? And Biden has had the best month of his presidency, and so now his approval ratings are still really low, but they are moving up. Will they continue to move up? And that will change some of the close elections if they keep going up.
I can't help but tap into your expertise. We have in weeks past talked with the very candidates themselves.
Yeah.
But since then, there are new internal polls, and both you and I know internal polls are kind of unique animals.
Right.
But in early August, Senator Lee had a poll that showed him 18 points up. Later in August, Evan McMullin has a poll that shows him 1 point up. And then the Deseret News Hinckley Institute poll back in July showed it within 5 points. That's a margin of error barely in that poll, but with Mike Lee ahead. Your thoughts?
You said the most important thing. They are internal polls, and you can make an internal poll say whatever you want. You ask all of the relatives, and you might do pretty well. So there's ways to cook those that look objective. My feel, and this is worth not very much, is that Lee is probably up double figures. If I had to bet everything on a margin right this second, I would say it's about 11 to 13 points. McMullin continues to get a lot of interest outside of the state of Utah. I think just in the last 24 hours, Washington Post and LA Times have done articles about him and about this race. I think it's a race built for national media and political scientists who want to know if there is a way to get rid of the further right and the further left. I don't want to say, any more inflammatory language about those candidates. Everyone thinks, why can't we elect more of this? 60% people want this, but we always get the 20% on either side, and we know why. But McMullin that's his pitch, is I'm going to change that. I'm going to get the moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, and independents, which is the majority, and that's how we're going to win.
Well, Kurt, I've left probably the most interesting and the easiest question to answer with about 15 seconds for the very end. Is Donald Trump going to run in 2024?
I think he will declare at some point. I don't think he will ultimately run.
Well, there you go. Kurt, it's always great to have you with us.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for having me, Doug. Great to be back in the studio.
And Kirk Jowers, now the CEO of ADDAX, and that's breaking news. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back with more. We're going to talk about a local race where they're going for the write-in. Stay with us. And welcome back. Longtime Davis County lawmaker Steve Handy says he's still running for office this November as a write-in candidate. The six-term incumbent lost in the Republican convention. The nomination, he lost it to Trevor Lee in March for District 16 Utah House seat. And here to talk about the write-in campaigns and Steve Handy's efforts to keep his seat is the Associate Dean for the University of Utah's Political Science Department, Matthew Burbank. And Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, I was mentioning in our off-air conversation, there seems to be a real discrepancy as to what happens in the Republican caucus convention system versus what happens in a Republican primary. First of all, could you give us a little background and education on that?
Yes, so the difference really is who's participating in those processes, right? So in the caucus convention system, what you tend to see is that those are the people who are kind of most strongly dedicated to the party and generally kind of most ideological, both on the Democratic side or the Republican side. But for Republicans, it's generally been more conservative members have been the ones who have served as delegates and been active in the caucus convention system. Mm-hmm. And so that means that they often are looking for candidates who fit their profile. Whereas if you look, for example, at the number of primaries that we've seen, and a lot of times we've seen differences between what happens in a caucus and what happens in the primary, what we see is that the voters don't necessarily take that same view, right? That they tend to have, it's a broader group of people who are participating, and very often you get more moderate candidates.
Professor, I was really surprised, honestly, when Steve Handy did not go this route. And often when I have known Steve Handy for years and years and years, I couldn't possibly vote for him. I'm not in the right district. So I'm just sitting on the sidelines. But often there are legislators and those who are elected that you kind of keep an eye on, and you kind of go, wow, you know. But when I heard that he wasn't going to get the signatures, use SB 54 and so on, I thought, ooh, and you know, you look at how many times, I think of, for example, John Curtis in our federal delegation. I think of Governor Herbert a while back in the convention. If you had looked at what had happened in the convention, you go, boy, these candidates are in trouble. And then it's just a total flip-flop where it's just a domination, even landslide, in the primary.
That's right. I mean, we've seen a number of cases where again, the difficulty for many, particularly elected officials, because again, these are the people who have a track record, and it's oftentimes that's what delegates are sort of objecting to. But when they get to a primary, which is a broader group of Republican voters and not simply the people who are kind of most ideological, then what you often see is that the numbers look very different, right? Yeah. So, and that's a pattern I think that we've seen, you know, a number of times, and Governor Herbert was one of those cases.
What makes this so unique, since Steve decided not to go with SB 54 and get the signatures, is he's kind of out in the cold. But is he? Because a write-in is always possible. Mm-hmm. There are still obligations, there's still things you have to do. Right. But the write-in candidate, I'm trying to boot up anybody that I can remember being a write-in candidate. Wasn't Joe Lieberman once a write-in candidate in Connecticut when he lost the nomination?
I think he ran as an independent, but I don't think he was a write-in candidate.
Right.
Lisa Murkowski did run as a write-in candidate.
That's right. That's right. Write-ins, it's so tricky. Are there going to be stickers? Do you have to handwrite it in? If you misspell it, are you going to be out in the dark? What happens here?
So, I mean, again, the advantage that he has is, number one, he's an incumbent, right? So people know his name, right? And again, he's got deep roots in his legislative district and in that area, having served in local government there as well as a state legislature. So people know him, right? And voters have voted for him in the past, and so he's got that as an advantage. He also has some resources, right? So he's got campaign funds, and that's going to help as well, right? Because that's one of the things you need if you're going to run a write-in candidate, is you have to let people know, and that's where there's an awful lot of work involved. In terms of what happens, I mean, the other advantage he has, at least in a sense, again, write-in candidates are always really difficult, but the advantage he has is because of the mail-in ballot, right? People have a chance to take a look at the ballot and say, this isn't what I expected, right? Maybe I better go do a little research and check into this. And again, you know, he's got a website up. He's got his argument out there for why he should be a writing candidate. And so that gives voters an opportunity to do that at their kitchen table instead of in a voting booth. And so that sort of changes the dynamic in a way. And that, you know, there are better chances, I think, there for being able to participate as a writing candidate in ways that you really can't when you're just relying on people to show up at the voting booth and know who to vote for.
Right. And again, you know, the reason we're talking about this is the anomaly. You know, news is what necessarily wasn't usual in happening. And again, I rack my brain to think of anything in recent history, certainly here in the state of Utah, that we could boot up on this. So it's an interesting topic. It will be watched very, very closely. And as far as any indicators, are you aware of any polls or anything like that out there that would indicate how this race is going?
No, I haven't seen any polling that would look at those state legislative races. And of course, it's always difficult because, again, you know, there are a number of people in that district who will vote for the person on the ballot who's a Republican, and you know, and that works for them. But again, I think there are also a lot of voters who are, you know, familiar with Representative Handy and can say, gee, I'm a little surprised not to see his name on here, right? So what's going on? And again, if they do a little work, they may well find that he's a writing candidate.
I so appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matthew Burbank with us here on Sunday Edition. And thanks for being part of the program today. We hope you'll join us again next week. And Music and the Spoken Word, that's coming up next.